reveals that nearly half of Iowa Republicans are in favor of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. spearheading the FDA or CDC. The JL Partner and Daily Mail survey of 600 Republican caucus goers in the Hawkeye State found that 48% endorsed RFK Jr. for either of the leading public health roles.
Well, at the Iowa State Fair on Sunday, Democratic presidential hopeful RFK Jr. did say that if elected president, he would support a national ban on abortion after 3 months of pregnancy. But then he walked those comments back a few hours later, claiming he misunderstood the reporter's question because of the noisy hall at the fair. A statement from the campaign reads, quote, "Mr. Kennedy's position on abortion is that it is always the woman's right to choose. He does not support legislation banning abortion."
Yeah, this was obviously very inflammatory to the Democratic base. He is, in fact, a Democrat, even if Republicans like Ron DeSantis are proposing that he lead institutions like the CDC under their administrations. He is running as a Kennedy Democrat. It's emblazoned proudly so on his website. And the most motivating issue right now for Democrats are abortion rights. As we've discussed many times on this show, Republicans have gotten themselves in a dog-car situation with the Dobbs opinion, and they ostensibly really had a setback in midterms last year and also have been losing a number of kind of ballot initiatives where abortion is on the ballot across the state, including most recently in Ohio, because of abortion being a turnout generating boon for Democrats, including Republicans that come out in support of the basic right to choose being maintained. So him doing this really feels like a self-own. And while many people are aware that, he walked back the statements, it doesn't quite gel with some folks when they listen to the actual conversation. That it was just a product of a misunderstanding because of the volume of the room. Because in his remarks, he kept talking about viability and stressing that's like a conceptual idea, right? That he doesn't think that you should be able to get an abortion after the fetus is viable. But viability comes long after 12 to 15 weeks. Like that's the whole point. So it seems like he had something in mind when he was talking about wanting to restrict abortion rights, something specific that wasn't just a factor of not being able to hear something in what was going on in the room. And that is unsettling to folks as he has taken a number of positions now that do seem to align him more with the Republican base than a Democratic Party
Well,
base.
and in some ways that position, because he was talking about a federal abortion policy. I know many conservative pro-life Republicans who do not support, who think it should be decided state by state, and they would support a more restrictive policy in their individual state, but they don't want there to be any national policy. That is the more extreme part of what he said. Obviously, the 3 months is it's like 14, 15 weeks. I mean, that is. I don't know that policy is necessarily so controversial. Well, obviously, there are many people who think there should be no restrictions.
A national ban at that point, we already have in states that have implemented more strict abortion restrictions post-Dobbs. You have people women who are in health crises who are being told you have to go into sepsis as your baby has died, you're lying in the hospital, you're waiting for a DNC to save the mother's life. And they said because of the abortion laws in their states, the doctors want to wait for you to be actually in a life-threatening sepsis condition before we'll even do a life-saving operation. So those are the kinds of moments that are not contemplated when you start talking about bans on abortion that aren't considering the medical advice that doctors would advise.
Contemplated in France and Spain and Denmark. I mean, that policy. I'm not saying I like it or don't like it, but it is similar to what our peer countries have, right? So, I was looking at their cutoffs in preparation for this.
So help me understand. I think I might be misunderstanding your point. You seem to agree that most Americans do not favor, including a lot of Republicans, do not favor a national abortion ban, certainly not at 12 to 15 weeks. So you're saying that because it's done in Europe?
I think they don't think that abortion policy should be made at the federal level. But a state adopting a 15-week cutoff for abortion would be in keeping with what, again, most European countries have.
Even on a state-by-state basis, some
European countries have stricter cutoffs.
Ohioans who voted for Trump twice just came out in droves to say quite the opposite, that they defeated this this initial ballot measure that would have made it easier for Republicans to change the Constitution to impose an abortion ban, they came out and defeated it. They defeated it. It would make it more difficult for the Democrats to change the rules to protect abortion rights. It would make it more difficult for anyone to pass
any ballot initiative ever
but the way
for
this
any
is being
reason.
framed was that there is going to be an effort to protect abortion rights in Ohio, that Republicans wanted to make it more difficult to pass. So this was very publicly and obviously a referendum on the right to choose, and people came out in droves in a Trump state to prevent Republicans from blocking a bill ultimately in the fall that will protect abortion rights in the state. So this isn't necessarily, I'm only objecting to it in a state-based, on a federal basis. These are people in a state context who want to protect their right to choose and in fact want to strengthen their right to choose in light of Roe being overturned. That being said, it's just very confusing why RFK Jr. is in a realm where he's making these kind of statements. So specifically, what he had said initially, and again, we've read his retraction, but what he said initially was, quote, "I believe a decision to abort a child should be up to the women during the first 3 months of life," but added, "Once a child is viable outside of the womb, I think then the state has an interest in protecting the child." They went back and forth a number of times because the reporter, I think, understanding the significance of what he was saying and how different the language was from the kind of Democratic Party line, asked him to continue to clarify, and he continued to say things that were ambiguous and seemed to be focused on the idea of validating a federal abortion ban at any time.
Well, I have no argument that what he said was out of keeping with what the Democratic Party's position on abortion is, which is a very, in my view, extreme, but allowing up until very late in the pregnancy, if not for the entirety of the pregnancy.
He said he would sign a federal ban on abortion after 15 weeks or 21 weeks of pregnancy if he were elected president, which again is not what viability is.
Which now he said he doesn't, which now he's taking that back.
This is the fundamental question. Why, given that he was doing so well in the polls, when he was focused on CDC overreach, when he was focused on free speech, Julian Assange, the toxic chemicals in our environment, the kinds of, chronic disease, the kinds of things that many Americans have firsthand exposure with, and who then they feel that the government is not protecting them from. Is he now pivoting toward issues that are deeply unpopular, both with the Democratic base and as a whole, and which really undermine the framing of himself as kind of an independent-minded person who is anti-establishment, starting with some of his statements about Israel, which seemed to be, I think Marianne Williamson characterized them as AIPAC talking points from 10 years ago. Not even the kind of contemporary consensus of the Democratic Party, which is extremely friendly toward Israel and considers it to be our greatest ally. He's even to the right of those kinds of statements. And now dabbling in discourse around a federal abortion ban. It's difficult for me to see strategically what the value of that is. And then what does it mean for many leftists who were looking credulously at his campaign, if only because Dennis Kucinich, who is perceived to be a progressive hero and icon, who has worked an entire multi-decade career taking unpopular progressive positions at his own expense politically often, him being RFK Jr.'s campaign manager, there's a dissonance between what that stood for in terms of RFK Jr.'s progressive bona fides and how RFK Jr. is increasingly behaving in the positions he's choosing to take, even if now, of course, I want to be clear, he's now walked this one back.
I mean, I think I don't know, but I think he's trying to bring people into his coalition who are not traditional kind of left people, such as yourself. Frankly, perhaps he thinks there's not enough of those people to help to get him in the position to be the nominee or a significant presence. And he's seen all of the good response he can actually get from conservative type people from talking about things that they're interested in. And maybe his strategy is to do more of that. I mean, he hasn't stopped talking about, he's not actually talking about COVID any less. You're right that this is a kind of novel position for him to take, although he did walk it back. So I don't know what his strategy is, but he's certainly not running as a typical left candidate, more so the way like Marianne Williamson is, for instance.
Well, it seems Kennedy's debate on Israel-Palestine with Gray Zone's Max Blumenthal may be happening after all. Here's Kennedy in Iowa.
Yeah, I've never made an anti-Semitic comment in my life. In fact, I'm also being, by the far left, I'm also, and by the mainstream media, I'm also at the same time being accused of being a Zionist. So in fact, I'm debating Matt Blumenthal or in a couple of weeks because he's complaining that I'm a Zionist. So it's pretty hard to justify, it's pretty hard to reconcile somebody being an anti-Semite and a Zionist. I've never made any anti-Semitic. I've never made any anti-Semitic, even a phrase in my entire life.
So, for one, it is not difficult to imagine. I'm not saying this at all about RFK Jr., but it is not difficult to imagine someone being a Zionist and anti-Semitic. The evangelical right was motivated in large part over the first part of this century, in the early aughts, in the Tea Party era and the Bush era, by their religious belief being that there had to be a Jewish state in the region for the second coming of Christ. They have ideological interest in their being in Israel that have nothing to do with having any positive feelings for wanting to protect the interests of Jewish people. It also is obviously the case that Israel is a country. Jewish people are a religion and an ethnic group. There are many Jewish people around the world who are not, in fact, Israeli. And being anti-Semitic does not, or not being anti-Semitic doesn't map onto supporting the actions of a nation in the world that's a political entity that, of course, makes choices all the time that many people disagree with.
I don't know. I guess that's theoretically possible. In reality, most of the individuals I see making anti-Semitic comments on social media or elsewhere, like tangentially associated with the right or they're kind of just dissident people, are also deeply anti-Israel. So
that is not my experience at all.
Hand in hand.
The right and left establishments in the United States of America uniformly and vociferously support our policy of enormous aid packages to Israel because of the perceived strategic advantages to having military foothold in the region. And it has nothing to do with thoughts, feelings, and love and affection and deep sympathies for the Jewish people as a ethnic and religious entity.
Okay, well, that doesn't make you necessarily anti-Semitic.
Right, that's my point. I'm not saying anybody's I'm not saying that anything about RFK Jr., but the conflation that he's making between being supportive of Jewish people and supportive of the state of Israel is, in fact, something that has been considered to be an anti-Semitic trope, because Israel is not Judaism. That is a conflation that in and of itself is problematic, and it's especially problematic to many progressive Israeli Jews who disagree with their government policies. There have been huge protests with millions of people in the street. All of this here because of a right-wing government takeover.
The policies of Israel, the funding of Israel, doesn't necessarily make you anti-Semitic. Certainly, I oppose many of those policies, and I oppose the funding, and I'm not anti-Semitic. But going the other way, most people that I can tell who are anti-Semitic are also against Israel.
I don't know that you can see the trends and again, I'm not trying to cast broad aspersions among evangelicals, but there was definitely a group of people who definitely think that their religion is the be-all end-all and that Judaism is not, who are invested in various reasons politically in the state of Israel, who might have all kinds of diverse and complicated feelings about Jewish people as a whole. But that's not the point that's being made here. The point that RFK Jr. is trying to make is that he's using his Zionism as a defense of claims of anti-Semitism. And I think that he should just defend his claims of anti-Semitism separate and apart from his feelings about Israel, because those two things do not go in lockstep. I think that we can agree.
All right, we'll have more Rising right after this.